Good to see everybody today on this cold, cold day. Grateful that we're actually here together, and also grateful for those that are joining online this morning as well. All right, so the teaching team, we want to speak really like on those topics that connect with God's heart as well as our own, right? So when we get animated up in front here, I know it sounds kind of like we're mad, but we're not, okay? We just get excited about this stuff, where our passion can sometimes get mistaken for like they're angry, right? They're angry with me and berating us. But no, I think we just want people to get it so deeply that our tone kind of increases. So just relax. We're not yelling at you most of the time. Sometimes, though, we come across a text that almost has the opposite effect. This week, I want us to look at God giving the law at Mount Sinai. And I think it has to be done thoughtfully, reflectively. So while some people, I suppose, love to preach law, they love preaching the law and they get enthusiastic about it, I'd like to really approach the law more thoughtfully today. And there's a reason. I think one of the most common objections to Christians and Christianity in the West is this idea of law. Often when people think of the law in the Bible, they think of the Old Testament. So the Old Testament is law, the New Testament is grace. That's not true. Or maybe some people have grown up in a very legalistic background, a legalistic faith, where the rules or the law only serve to kind of keep people like reined in and making them nice, kind of good, moral people. And, you watched that as you were growing up and it left you cold. Yet, I want us to think about this, that there's something about the law or rules where it's easy to depend on them, all of us, because the rules give clarity that we're doing well with God or compared to others. Rules or laws like don't drink, don't smoke, don't dance, don't go to movies, tithe 10%. All of those really provide clarity. But soon, I think people that follow the rules end up becoming like the religious leader in the Bible who, when faced with the command to love your neighbor with as much intensity and priority as you give yourself, asked the rule-driven question, so who's my neighbor then? So, in honesty, I think while all of us say that we would prefer and we love grace, I think there is something about us that we secretly love law because it gives us clarity. It takes away ambiguity in our life, especially in our Christian faith. And we hate ambiguity. On the other hand, there are people who reject the law completely. The deep underlying motivation is, who are you to tell me what to do? So in the vein of the postmodern philosopher Michel Foucault, who thought that all claims to truth are simply a claim to power, right? The rules are not about freedom, but they're a mask for power and a form of manipulation. So the idea is to throw off all the rules. These rules shackle people to a particular moral code, which is both oppressive and primitive, since we should evolve past the rules and focus in religion only on love. So on one hand, we have law-keeping, and on the other hand, we have law-avoiding. Religious people, non-religious people. Both of these approaches to law are simplistic, or what I call reductionistic. It's reducing law to a level where you either have to fully accept it or fully reject it. And these are both two different expressions in our culture today. Both sides today point their finger at each other in op-ed pieces, and in interviews on TV saying how the other side is ruining our country. So I'm grateful for Christians like Sinclair Ferguson, who astutely point out that these two groups of religious and non-religious people are two peas in the same pod because they both tap into the same motivation. You see, the non-religious person throws off the law of God, the rules, right, that God lays down, and says, I don't believe in God. I don't want to follow the rules. Then there are the religious people, those who go to church, they follow the 10 Commandments, they try to be good Christians. But both are really saying this, how the human heart is described in the Bible. And it's this: you can't fully trust God. One person does it by rejecting the rules, and the other person does it by trying to be moral. Both do it to rule their own life and create their own kingdom instead of embracing God's kingdom. And everything that I'm watching today currently in our culture is about people trying to create their kingdom on earth. And all I know is this, is that Christians are supposed to care deeply about God's kingdom. The self-righteousness of religious people is just as foul-smelling as those who are not religious. Both want to justify themselves as they question the very goodness of God and His commitment to our happiness and joy. And so I want you to see really, how we're not talking about that the gospel is somewhere in the middle between rule keeping or law keeping and law avoiding. It's not in the middle. The gospel is a completely different road. The Bible is much more nuanced when it comes to the law. There are distinctions that we have to make, but to see it either as simply law-keeping or law-avoiding is overly simple. So today, let's look at the story of God giving Israel the law at Mount Sinai. And my hope is this: when you walk away from here, that you'll have a different perspective on the law, all right? So let me read from Exodus 19 and then the first 4 verses of Exodus 20. On the first day of the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the wilderness in front of the mountain. And then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people, and they set before them all the words of the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." And so Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. And God spoke all these words, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy." At Sinai in the Egyptian wilderness, God instructed Moses to go up the mountain. And so in the next few chapters of Exodus, Moses goes up and down the mountain something like 8 times, right? Up and down, up and down, up and down. In chapter 19, verse 4, God instructed Moses to tell the people something very important. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. His point was this: Israel, you did nothing to contribute to me saving you. My rescuing you was solely by my grace. I'm the one who carried you out on eagle's wings. Now, that picture of eagle's wings conveys not only strength, but security, safety. God brought them out of Egypt and brought them to himself. So when we talk about the law, it's important to put it in the proper order. It's always God's rescue or salvation first, and then the law. It's not, I'm giving you the law first, obey fully, and then you'll be saved. It's always grace first, and then obedience. And so if you and I get these out of order, we're going to run the risk of believing that somehow we contribute to our own, right, salvation, our own being rescued by God. Alec Motyer, in his commentary on Exodus, described the story from the Passover to Mount Sinai as the largest gospel visual aid demonstrating the proper order of grace first and then obedience. Motyer then points out that there are blessings available because of this grace relationship. The blessings flow out of God's prior salvation. In your obedience, then, Israel, you will experience these blessings. So let me explain briefly how this works. In 1 John 1:9, we read this: if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. Now, wait a second. Aren't we already forgiven? Haven't you thought about that? Like, am I confessing to be forgiven? Wait, I thought I was forgiven as a Christian. That's weird. If we're forgiven completely, why do we need to confess our sins? And it's this: because we confess in order to experience the already settled forgiveness that we've been given. We confess in order to live into the blessing of his forgiveness that's already been given. You with me? Good, thank you. Few of you, all right. Okay, the rest of you, we're going to have another session after this. All right, okay. All right. So the blessings don't come, they come after as a result of God's grace. They come as a result of God's grace. And so here are the blessings for Israel. First, you will be my treasure. That word treasure was used of a king's private wealth. Now, back in those days, kings owned everything, okay? But that word treasure was a special word. And it was used for a king's possessions that were special objects of beauty that he kept close to them in his private chamber. And so what God is saying is this: in my rescuing you, my heart was on full display. I heard your deepest cries for help, and I came to you because you are so incredibly valuable to me. So you'll be my treasure. Secondly, you'll be a kingdom of priests. Now, the job of the priest in Israel was to stand in the gap between God and people. And so Israel then was to serve as a nation priest to show the other nations outside of Israel, right, who God was in a countercultural kind of way. So in 1 Peter 2, Peter calls Christians a nation of priests, standing in the gap between the world and God to represent God well. And so if God's people will commit themselves to life together, to real character change that comes from the deep parts of us, and our attitude toward sex, money, power, politics, and nationalism. You know what I mean by nationalism? Like how we relate to our country. If those are different, then people might scratch their heads and say, Now, what's up with that, right? That's weird, kind of, but it doesn't point to us. We're not trying to be weird. We're pointing to God, right? Our recent sermon series, Life Together, spoke of God creating a new community, a new family, a new counterculture to represent him well to those outside the church and inside the church. So you'll be a treasure. You'll be a kingdom of priests. Third, you'll be a holy nation. Now that word holy means to be set apart for a special purpose. God's people were set apart by him to be something special. They were to be distinct, different, in the midst of the surrounding nations, to reflect Yahweh. Israel was charged to live out God's moral character in righteousness and justice, so that its national and cultural life stood out to demonstrate the moral character, the redemptive love, and the justice of God. And so the law was given for a number of reasons, and these reasons become clearer as time goes on, particularly as the sacrificial system gets into place. Now, if you want a longer version of why the law is important and why the law was given, you can go back to one of Pastor Josh's sermons in the Epic series that we did. All I want you to see today is this, is that the law was first given to frame God's heart in what a relationship would look like with him for people who had no structure. God just didn't say, as he was leading Israel out of Egypt, "You're my people and I love you. Now get out there and do what I tell you to do." That's not what he was saying. The law is God's detailed picture of how Israel was to be a treasure, a nation of priests, a holy nation. And the reason why it's so detailed is because God wanted his people to understand the depth to which they were to be different. So the giving of the law at Mount Sinai is what theologians call the Mosaic covenant. Now that word covenant is used in Exodus 19, and we don't use it much today. It's kind of an unknown word. What's a covenant? For Jews, covenant is an ancient word, and it refers to a sacred commitment between two parties. In this case, God and man. In covenant, both parties promise to loyally bind themselves to each other regardless of how they feel or what may happen to them. The giving of the law at Mount Sinai, then, is God speaking and Israel reciprocating by responding in faith to God. Remember, it's grace first and then law. Yahweh was committed to Israel unconditionally. But now with the Mosaic covenant, God's people would act out their commitment to him and experience the blessings of being a treasure, of being a priestly nation, of being a holy nation. And as they acted this out, if they did, it would go well for them. If they didn't act it out, it wouldn't go well for them. Now, we don't use the word covenant today. We rarely use the word covenant, except in one major way that tends to get overlooked by so many churches. We understand our relationship to God as a king relating to his subjects, or a shepherd relating to sheep, or a father relating to children. Well, those metaphors are important. They're important because they tell us something about our relationship with God. But they aren't adequate by themselves. God also describes himself as a groom relating to a bride. Now, this picture of God being married to his people is a major theme of the Hebrew people. Isaiah 54:5. For your maker is your what? Husband. The Lord Almighty is his name. But it's also in Ezekiel 16 and Jeremiah 2 and the whole book of Hosea. Okay, so now I know if you're a dude and you're sitting here, you're thinking, I'm the bride of Christ, man, that's weird. That's weird, okay? All right? Let me just say this. In Galatians 4, we read that we are all sons of God. So I suppose in the end it evens out, right? Okay. What is it about marriage, a marriage relationship, that speaks to our relationship with God? Let me give you a few thoughts. First is this, that the marriage covenant is a permanent, lasting relationship. So when I meet couples for the first time for premarital counseling, I never meet a couple that say this, you know, we're kind of in this until we fall out of love, right? Like, and then it's on to the next one. Look, even people outside the church, okay? The vast majority of people, even those who aren't Christian, think of marriage as a bond that's supposed to be lasting. It's supposed to be permanent. Every culture in the world treats marriage not as something temporary, but as something binding, lasting, permanent. Second, marriage is a legal declaration. In every culture of the world, if you are poor and you marry someone rich, even though you haven't done anything to earn this wealth, when you get married, legally now you are rich. When you become a Christian and you unite with Jesus by faith, you who are spiritually poor are now declared to be what? Legally rich in Christ. Third, marriage is the kind of relationship that is intensely close and personal. Unlike any other relationship that we know of, marriage gives us the opportunity to reveal ourselves, our hearts, our hopes, our dreams, even our fears with another person. So we have conversations with our spouses that are meant to reveal more than just surfacey stuff. And it's so incredibly personal that both praise and criticism sink in much deeper. So if Steve Buchelt said to me after this morning, man, you did a great job, John, I'd say, thanks, man, that's awesome, right? Now, if my wife said to me, John, you did an incredible job this morning, my heart would be doing backflips, right, the rest of the day. I'd be like, my wife really thinks I did a great job. That's awesome. If she would only tell me that, right? I'm kidding. God has the boldness to say this. That's the kind of relationship I want with you. That's the kind of relationship that you were made for. But this intensely close and personal part of marriage reveals in a different way. All of a sudden, Kay gets to see how I put a new roll of toilet paper in. And worse than that, both of us get to see something really ugly. Really ugly. In a mirror, we get to see how sick our hearts are. Marriage reveals the character deep inside our hearts. See, I might be able to fool a lot of people with how virtuous I am. I can't fool my wife. There's no other relationship that gives us a window into the sin that resides deeply into our heart as the relationship of marriage. In the same breath, though, there is no intensely personal relationship that has the same power to change us for the good as we experience redemption, forgiveness. We actually see our character changed. God called Moses to the top of Mount Sinai, Exodus 19 says to enact covenant. I'm giving you the law so that you know I treasure you, how you are to be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. In Jewish weddings, couples get married under what's called a chuppah, okay? It's a covering, and it symbolizes the thick cloud that hovered over Mount Sinai. Now it's getting interesting, right? There's another part of a Jewish ceremony where couples communicate covenant to each other, which is called ketubah. Now, in the ketubah, it's read aloud in a marriage ceremony, similar to what Moses did with the law or Torah in Exodus 24:3. When Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice, everything the Lord has said, we will do, or we do. Many Jews today see the law at Sinai given in the covenantal context of ketubah, the marital commitment between two parties. The giving of the law at Mount Sinai is really not about laying down a bunch of rules, but a kind of wedding ceremony enacted between God and his people. And so, this is my translation, okay? You might translate the first 4 commandments of the 10 commandments with ketubah in mind. Here we go. You shall have no other gods before me, or I'm the only one that you're married to. Here's the second commandment. You shall not make idols of other gods, or in my words, don't give yourself to other lovers. The third commandment. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Or my translation would be, when you take my name in marriage, don't take it lightly. It means something, so don't throw it around disrespectfully or without thought. Commandment 4, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Here's my translation. If we're married, you must intentionally carve out time to focus on me without you slaving to get ahead in life, remembering that I'm the creator of it all. Those are the first 4 commandments. Interesting. God was telling Israel, you're married to me. And if you're married to me, there are commitments that you have to make for your flourishing. These commitments are to make you distinct from other nations, so that as a nation, you point to me as your spouse. And yet, what kind of marriage do we know this turned out to be? Well, the rest of the Old Testament describes this as a train wreck of a story, as Israel couldn't keep the mutual demands of covenantal marriage. So you can read the book of Hosea and you can get a clear picture of Israel as a picture of our own leaking hearts, constantly trying to fill ourselves with other lovers while betraying the one who loves us the most. So you will never understand God's love unless you first see your wandering heart in a mirror. When a ruler sees his people breaking the law, what does he think? When a shepherd sees a sheep wandering off, what does he think? When a father sees a child disobey, what does he think? When a spouse sees their spouse in the arms of another lover, what does he think? Maybe you know somebody who's gone through this. Maybe you've gone through it. This image has to sink deeply into our hearts. It should well up emotions inside of us because the picture is so offensive. And yet this is a picture of our own wandering hearts. All of us have had the spousal love of God, and yet we're idol addicts, throwing ourselves into the arms of other lovers who will never satisfy us because they always give us false sense of intimacy and closeness. Many years ago, Derek Webb from the Christian band Caedmon's Call did a solo album, and he wrote a song, and the lyrics have haunted me for years. And the song was called Wedding Dress. It's actually a PG-13 song. I can't repeat all of it here, but there's one lyrical suggestion that I can't get it out of my mind. So could you love this illegitimate child? He didn't use the word illegitimate. Though I don't trust you to provide, with one hand in a pot of gold and with the other in your side, I am so easily satisfied with the call of lovers less wild that I would take a little cash over your very flesh and blood. Webb was lamenting in song how quick we are to put the wedding dress of marriage to God, but then we run after other lovers recklessly. And so one way that we ought to define sin then is spiritual adultery. Do you really understand the waywardness of your heart? What if the law really is less about breaking the rules? What if it's more about breaking the heart of God? If our relationship with God is like a marriage, in reality, it's like a really bad marriage. What hope, then, do you and I have? In Matthew 9, Jesus was asked by his disciples why they didn't fast. And Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he's with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and then they will fast." Now, fasting at that time had become solely associated with mourning. The point this morning is not for me to describe how or when we are to fast. The point really is Jesus then identified himself as the bridegroom. Now, for those who were listening, they knew that God was married to his people. But when Jesus identified himself as the bridegroom, the Jews that were listening understood very clearly that he was self-identifying as the God of Israel. Jesus was the one who not only gave the law at Mount Sinai, but he's the one who would meet the demands of covenant breaking in marriage. He's saying, I will not only fulfill my end of the covenant, but I'll fulfill yours as well. I'll fulfill my bride's as well. I'll go to the cross and suffer the agonizing pain of my bride's adultery. Jesus lived the law perfectly in our place, so that when the Father judges us on the basis of how well we kept the marriage covenant, he sees the one whom we're married to, the one who kept the wedding vows for you, me. He sees you as dressed in white. So here's a few thoughts. First, if you don't understand what theologians call the spousal love of Jesus Christ, you will see the law as a body of rules that must be kept. You will either strive to fulfill your marriage vows to him such that it will lead you to a place of pride, or you'll try to fulfill your covenantal commitments, and when you fail, you will be incredibly despondent, sad, filled with fear, guilt, shame, and condemnation. Second, unless you understand the spousal love of Jesus Christ, you will be tempted. If you're married, the temptation will be to make your earthly spouse the source of all your happiness and joy in life. Or you might look to your spouse and demand in a way that they meet all of your needs. Or if you're here this morning and you're not married, the temptation might be to turn marriage into something that you have to have, doing anything to get married. And so, in honesty, no human person can fill the relational void inside of you and meet all of your needs. No human person can do that. Only an eternal, unchanging, perfect person can do that. Third, unless you grasp the spousal love of Jesus Christ, you will always look at the commandments in the New Testament and approach them as you would orders or instructions given by a boss. Actually, when you understand the spousal love of Jesus Christ, what he asks of you feels more like an invitation than it does a commandment. Our wedding ceremonies are a living portrayal of the gospel story. For instance, when the bride walks down to be with the groom, every eye is on the bride. You know what I mean? But as a pastor, I get the best seat in the house. You know why? I get to watch the groom. I've seen grooms when the bride pops into the back, beaming. I see grooms start to cry because they're so happy. When we see the bride coming down for the groom, we are witnessing the final resolution of the gospel story. The reuniting of the bridegroom with his bride at the end of time. It's Jesus' return for his people, the church, those who truly belong to him. So his bride, the church, those true believers who have given their life to him, the one who, right, as they trust the one who fulfilled the law completely in their place. And when Jesus returns and sees his church, his joy wells up inside of him. That's who I died for. Every bride who comes down the aisle is absolutely beautiful. Colossians 1:22, we read this. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. That's how the bridegroom sees his bride. And when the earthly ceremony is over, the couple goes to the wedding reception. This pictures what the book of Revelation calls the wedding feast of the Lamb. The craziest part is this. Even people that aren't Christian, they just are enacting the gospel story, right? They all go to the wedding reception. This pictures what Revelation calls the wedding reception or the wedding feast of the Lamb. In other words, it's a picture of heaven. The family of God celebrating the reunion of the bridegroom with his bride. And so in closing, let me ask this. Do you know Jesus like this? Like the bridegroom? Do you? Are you just clocking in and out of your Christian life? Like Jesus, yeah, Jesus. Or does this stir your heart? Like, whoa, his love for me is like that? If you have never, ever trusted, put your faith completely in this spousal love of Jesus given to you because he died on the cross and resurrected for you, what are you waiting for? His love awaits you. Would you do this in a private moment with him? Just say, I need you. I want that love. Thank you that you demonstrated it by keeping the covenant completely for me, that I couldn't keep my vows, but you did. And for those of you who have been Christians for a long time, does this stir your heart? This, what we've talked about today, is the biblical story of a marriage consummated by his returning for us.